Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Terminal Velocity for DOS. Now, while you might know them for the Blood Rain series or the latest Ghostbusters game, this was actually Terminal Reality's very first release. It was published by 3D Realms back in 1995, and it came out shortly after Descent. So, it's a fairly similar game to that. It's an arcade-style flight combat game. And basically, it takes place over 3 episodes. The first episode was released as shareware, and the other 2 are in the registered version. They also released it on CD and floppy disk. And the CD version contains an extra 70 megabytes of cutscenes that are pre-rendered 3D. So, basically, what you're seeing here is actually the CD-ROM version of the game. This game was built on the Photex engine, which was specifically made for Terminal Velocity and then changed as more and more games got put on it. But it boasted photorealistic images and true color textures. And not only that, but it rendered extremely well on low-end PCs. So, what ended up happening was, this could be played by tons and tons of people. It just didn't get all the popularity that you'd expect it would, but anyway. Basically, the graphics look terrible by today's standards. I mean, the textures are pretty low res, but everything still looks pretty decent. Of course, it is still kind of hard to tell what stuff is on the ground anyway, but in the air, you can actually tell. And, I mean, the sprite work, which is basically just the heads-up display, is pretty decent. Animations are fairly non-existent, but this was around the time when polygonal 3D was pretty much getting its start. So, you don't really expect the graphics to be, you know, all that amazing by today's standards, but back then, they were absolutely phenomenal. Now, at the time this game was made, the sound design itself was actually fairly average, so, I mean, it's nothing all that spectacular. The sound effects themselves are the typical low-quality kind of thing that you'd expect from a 90s-era DOS game. The music, on the other hand, is not. It's digital soundtrack, which it was one of the first games to really get into that and fully take advantage of it. Now, unfortunately, the tracks themselves are kind of bleh. I mean, they're not bad by any means. It's just that they repeat themselves so much. It's just on a loop the entire time that you'll get tired of it. And, I mean, the soundtracks themselves, if were you to just listen to them once in a while, it'd be fine. But on that constant loop during these entire levels, it's per stage, basically. So, and there's multiple stages per episode, so you're going to hear those loops constantly, and it's probably going to get on your nerves after a while. But, the music itself is not bad. The sound effects are not bad either. It's just that the sound design overall is fairly average for the time. This stuff does its job, and that's about it. Now, of course, what it really comes down to is the gameplay itself, and what you have here is an extremely simple flight combat game that's in an arcade style. You fly around and shoot stuff. It blows up. And it came out about a month and a few days after Descent 1 did, and what it ended up having was 2 similar but very different games. They both play in the same sense that you're just flying around shooting stuff, but Descent takes place in a bunch of really narrow, cramped, claustrophobic corridors in mines, whereas Terminal Velocity takes place over these wide expanses, and occasionally you'll go into a tunnel and try to navigate your way out. Now, the problem with that is, again, the controls aren't all that amazing. They do their very best to be effective on a keyboard, and they do control very well. It's just that on a keyboard, it's kind of sluggish, so if you're going to play it, you might want to get a joystick. But if you're trying to navigate this cramped tunnel, it's kind of hard on a keyboard. But anyway, the first episode is what you have in the shareware, the second 2 are what you have in the full version. And basically, it's about Earth has joined this collective of alien nations, and all of a sudden all the other aliens turn against Earth and attack it, and you're an Earth pilot who has to go and stop the attacks and stick it to the aliens and all that kind of stuff. And it's a pretty solid flight arcade game. You don't really care about the story. But I mean, the AI is absolutely nothing to write home about. Of course, you can see in the video they just kind of fly around aimlessly and shoot all over the place. They'll constantly try to ram you, and I don't think they try to. I think it's just that they do. But and then of course you have a stage, like say 1-1, and it'd be stage 1 part 1 or stage 1 part 2, and eventually you get to a boss stage, and you have a boss and you fight the boss, and it's really not too hard. It's just you really have to learn how to control your vehicle pretty well, because the boss battles tend to take place in these kind of cramped areas, and the bosses take up a lot of space, so it's kind of that tunnel problem again. But if you're looking for a solid arcade shooter in the flight variety, and you've already got Descent, try Terminal Velocity. I get the feeling you might like it. But if you're not into this particular genre, this is a little bit hard to get into. It's a little bit easier to get into than Descent, because Descent's a little bit more of a flight sim than this. But it's really this very accessible, just fun arcade shooter, and if you're into that kind of thing, then I highly recommend it to you. But if you're not, try the demo. I'm going to put the shareware version link in the video description box, so if you want to check that out, you can. Again, it runs off DOS, so you'll need to run it in DOSBox, but is it worth playing? Definitely. I love it. It's one of the very few flight combat games that I actually do like, and the reason I don't like most of them is simply because they're too complicated. And this is very simple. It's very straightforward. It works really well, and I do highly recommend it.